Czesław Miłosz was born in Lithuania in 1911. He spent part of his childhood in Russia, grew up in Poland, where he was active in literary political groups influenced by Marxism. During the Second World War, he worked as a writer and editor for resistance publications, and at the war's end, joined the Polish diplomatic service. However, he broke with the regime in 1951 after the suppression of the coalition government and settled in Paris. Since 1961, Mr. Miłosz has been professor of Slavic languages and literature at the University of California at Berkeley and has published numerous books. Among his publications are Selected Poems, 1973, Bells in Winter, 1978, and a novel, The Issa Valley, published in 1981. As most of you know, I'm sure, in 1980, Mr. Miłosz was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. His most recent poem that I'm familiar with appeared last Thursday in the New York Times. It was a poem written to Lech Walesa. It's a great pleasure to present to you Czesław Miłosz.
I am a poet of Polish language, and the poems which I am going to read are translations done by myself and my friends. I am proud of the fact that I am one of very few writers from my part of Europe who received the Nobel Prize, though writing in an exotic language, in Polish. Translations, of course, of my poems into English present several difficulties solved by my friends with whom I work. I am going to read those poems in English and some poems in Polish. I hope that there are some people who understand Polish, and those who do not understand would have just a feeling, just sound of them. I would comment also, I know that poetry reading sometimes is a very dry affair if there are no commentaries. So I would comment and more or less explain circumstances in which poems were written. I should say that in my youth, when I was a beginning poet, in Poland or in Czechoslovakia or in Hungary, poets used to go to Paris for an apprenticeship. Paris was the capital of the world. When I came the first time in Paris, that was the capital of the French Empire, and I saw a colonial exhibition in which was near the zoo of Vincennes. So you looked at the animals, and then you looked at the natives in their natural habitat. Many years later, after my first arrival in Paris, many years later, returning to Paris, I wrote the following poem. As a comment, I am native of Lithuania, and in my country there was a belief that some animals are sacred, and among those animals was the water snake. By passing Rue Descartes, I descended towards the Seine, shy, a traveler, a young barbarian, just come to the capital of the world. You are many, from Jassy and Koloshvar, Vilno and Bucharest, Saigon and Marrakesh, ashamed to remember the customs of our homes, about which nobody here should ever be told. The clapping for servants, barefooted girls hurry in, dividing food with incantations, choral prayers recited by master and household together. I had left the cloudy provinces behind. I entered the universal, dazzled and desiring. Soon enough, many from Yassi and Koloshwar or Saigon or Marrakesh would be killed because they wanted to abolish the customs of their homes. Soon enough, their peers were seizing power in order to kill in the name of the universal beautiful ideas. Meanwhile, the city behaved in accordance with its nature, rustling with throaty laughter in the dark, baking long breads and pouring wine into clay pitchers, buying fish, lemons, and garlic at street markets, indifferent as it was to honor and shame and greatness and glory, because that had been done already and had transformed itself into monuments representing nobody knows whom, into arias hardly audible, and into turns of speech. Again, I lean on the rough granite of the embankment, as if I had returned from travels through the underworld, and suddenly saw in the light the reeling wheel of the seasons, where empires have fallen, and those once living are now dead. There is no capital of the world, neither here nor anywhere else, and the abolished customs are restored to their small fame. And now I know that the time of human generations is not like the time of the earth. As to my heavy sins, I remember one most vividly. How, one day, walking a forest path along a stream, I pushed a rock down onto a water snake coiled in the grass. And what I have met with in life was the just punishment. It happened so that in my fate was to spend in France nearly 10 years later on, after the last war. And here is another poem which the action takes place in Paris. This is a little prose poem about, well, on a subject quite serious. It deals with the verb to be. I consider that this is the most sacred word of the language. And even I would like to write without using that word, because I consider it too sacred, but it's very difficult to write without a verb to be. The poem is entitled Esse. I looked at that face dumbfounded. The lights of metro stations flew by. I didn't notice them. What can be done if our sight lacks absolute power to devour objects ecstatically in an instant, leaving nothing more than the void of an ideal form, a sign like a hieroglyph simplified from the drawing of an animal or bird? A slightly snub nose, a high brow with slickly brushed back hair, the line of the chin. But why isn't the power of sight absolute? And in a whiteness tinged with pink, two sculpted holes containing a dark, lustrous lava. To absorb that face, but to have it simultaneously against the background of all spring boughs, walls, waves, in its weeping, its laughter, moving it back 15 years or ahead 30. To have. It is not even a desire. Like a butterfly, a fish, the stem of a plant, only more mysterious. And so it befell me that after so many attempts at naming the world, I am able only to repeat, harping on one string, the highest, the unique avowal, beyond which no power can attain. I am, she is. Shout, blow the trumpets, make 1,000-strong marches, leap, rend your clothing, repeating only is. She got out at Raspail. I was left behind with the immensity of existing things. A sponge suffering because it cannot saturate itself. A river suffering because reflections of clouds and trees are not clouds and trees. There are very few poems probably in our time praising reason. Somehow reason is not very highly regarded by poets. But here is a poem entitled Incantation, which I'm going to read first in English and then in Polish because it's short. Incantation or throwing spells. Throwing spells, as you know, is results from a belief that you can change the reality by an act of magic. So this is my magic here, incantation. Human reason is beautiful and invincible. No bars, no barbed wire, no pulping of books, no sentence of banishment can prevail against it. It establishes the universal ideas in language and guides our hand. So we write truth and justice with capital letters, lie and oppression with small. It puts what should be above things as they are, is an enemy of despair and a friend of hope. It doesn't know Jew from Greek or slave from master, giving us the estate of the world to manage. It saves austere and transparent phrases from the filthy discord of tortured words. It says that everything is new under the sun, opens the country with poetry, her ally. As late as yesterday, nature celebrated their birth. The news was brought to the mountains by a unicorn and an echo. Their enemies have delivered themselves to destruction. Maybe the same in Polish. Zakompanicji nie mogą nic przeciw niemu. On ustanawia w języku powszechne idee i prowadzi nam rękę, więc piszemy z wielkiej litery prawda i sprawiedliwość, a z małej kłamstwo i krzywda. On ponad to, co jest, wynosi, co być powinno. Nieprzyjaciel rozpaczy, przyjaciel nadziei. On nie zna Żyda ni Greka, niewolnika ni pana, w zarząd oddając nam wspólne gospodarstwo świata. On z plugawego zgiełku dręczonych wyrazów ocala zdania surowe i jasne. On mówi nam, że wszystko jest ciągle nowe pod słońcem. Otwiera dłoń za krzepłą tego, co już było. Piękna i bardzo młoda jest filozofia i sprzymierzona z nią poezja w służbie dobrego. Natura ledwo wczoraj święciła ich narodziny. Wieść o tym górom przyniosły jednorożec i echo. Sławna będzie ich przyjaźń, ich czas nie ma granic. Ich wrogowie wydali siebie na zniszczenie. Do you like the sound? I am reluctant to read poems written at the time of war, under the Nazi occupation in Warsaw, because they are maybe too depressing. So I would limit myself to two, I guess. There was a tremendous production of poetry under the Nazi occupation in Poland. A relatively recent anthology of poetry of resistance counts some 2,000 pages, and this is only a part of what has been written then. I'm going to read a poem written in the spring of 1945, when Warsaw was a completely heap of ruins, really, a huge city changed by the Nazis into ruins, houses dynamite, population deported, houses dynamited one after another. And this poem, Dedication, is a kind of a farewell, maybe to myself and or to those who perished in the battles of the uprising of 45. You whom I couldn't save, listen to me. Try to understand this simple speech as I would be ashamed of another. I swear there is me no wizardry of words. I speak to you with silence, like a cloud or a tree. What strengthened me for you was little. You mixed up very well to an epoch with the beginning of a new one, inspiration of hatred with lyrical beauty, blind force with accomplished shape. Here is the valley of shallow Polish rivers and an immense bridge going into white fog. Here is a broken city, and the wind throws the screams of gulls on your grave when I am talking with you. What is poetry which doesn't save nations or people? A connivance with official lies, a song of drunkards whose throats will be cut in a moment, readings for sophomore girls. That I wanted good poetry without knowing it, that I discovered late its salutary aim. In this and only this I find salvation. They used to pour millet on graves or poppy seeds to feed the dead who would come disguised as birds. I put this book here for you who once lived, so that you should visit us no more. During the war, a number of ironic poems or poems representing gallows humor were written. Here is a, I should say, ironic song, a song on the end of the world. I'm going to read this in English and then in Polish. This is a little song. When I read it in Polish, you will see that this is a kind of a song. On the day the world ends, a bee circles a clover, a fisherman mends a glimmering net, happy porpoises jump in the sea, by the rain spout young sparrows are playing, and the snake is gold-skinned, as it should always be. On the day the world ends, women walk through the fields under their umbrellas, a drunkard grows sleepy at the edge of a lawn, vegetable peddlers shout in the street, and a yellow-sailed boat comes nearer the island. The voice of a violin lasts in the air and leads into a starry night. And those who expected lightning and thunder are disappointed. And those who expected signs and archangels' trumps do not believe it is happening now. As long as the sun and the moon are above, as long as the bumblebee visits a rose, as long as rosy infants are born, no one believes it is happening now. Only a white-haired old man who would be a prophet, yet is not a prophet for he's much too busy, repeats while he binds his tomatoes, "There will be no other end of the world. There will be no other end of the world." The same in Polish. Piosenka o końcu świata. W dzień końca świata pszczoła krąży nad kwiatem nasturcji, rybak naprawia błyszczącą sieć, skaczą w morzu wesole delfiny, młode wróble czepiają się rynny i wąż ma złotą skórę, jak powinien mieć. W dzień końca świata kobiety idą polem pod parasolkami, pijak zasypia na brzegu trawnika. Nawołują na ulicy sprzedawcy warzywa i łódka z żółtym żaglem do wyspy podpływa, dźwięk skrzypiec w powietrzu trwa i noc gwiaździsto odmyka. A którzy czekali błyskawic i gromów, są zawiedzeni. A którzy czekali znaków i archanielskich trąb, nie wierzą, że staje się już. Dopóki słońce i księżyc są w górze, dopóki trzmiel nawiedza róże, dopóki dzieci różowe się rodzą, nikt nie wierzy, że staje się już. Tylko siwy staruszek, który byłby prorokiem, ale nie jest prorokiem, bo ma inne zajęcie, powiada przywiązując pomidory. Innego końca świata nie będzie, innego końca świata nie będzie. Sometimes I was asked what is really my philosophy, what is my Weltanschauung. So I wrote a poem of 6 lines presenting my philosophy. And here it is. If I had to tell what the world is for me, I would take a hamster or a hedgehog or a mole and place him in a theater seat one evening, and bringing my ear close to his humid snout, would listen to what he says about the spotlights, sounds of the music, and movements of the dance. As a child, I read once a book on a little boy who was nasty, and as a punishment, a fairy changed him into a fly for one afternoon. Many years later, I wrote a poem on that subject, Bobo's Metamorphosis. Bobo, a nasty boy, was changed into a fly. In accordance with the right of the flies, he washed himself by a rock of sugar and ran vertically in caves of cheese. He flew through a window into the bright garden. There, indomitable ferry boats of leaves carried a drop, taut with the excess of its rainbow. Mossy parks grew by ponds of light in the mountains of bark. An acrid dust was falling from flexible columns inside cinnabar flowers. And though it didn't last longer than from tea time till supper, later on, when he had pressed trousers and a trimmed moustache, he always thought, holding a glass of liquor, that he was cheating them, for a fly shouldn't discuss the nation and productivity. A woman facing him was a volcanic peak, where there were ravines, craters, and in hollows of lava the movement of earth was tilting crooked trunks of pines. Translations from Polish sometimes are tricky, because in Polish there is a great freedom of coining new words, coining verbs from nouns, nouns from verbs. And for instance, and there are many words denoting qualities. For instance, a quality of being a dog or a jay, or in this case, in my short poem, magpie. Quality of being a magpie. So we turned around, sroczność in Polish. So we turned around and we decided with a friend of mine, and we decided to entitle the poem Magpiety. This is a philosophical poem, very short, but philosophical, and referring to a basic philosophical quarrel of the Middle Ages, a quarrel about universals. That was a problem whether the ideas precede the existence of real things, or the real things precede the existence of ideas. Namely, whether the idea of the magpie precedes the existence of a real magpie. Magpiety. The same, and not quite the same, I walked through oak forests, amazed that my muse, Mnemosyne, has in a way diminished my amazement. A magpie was screeching, and I said, Magpiety. What is magpiety? I shall never achieve a magpie heart, a hairy nostril over the beak, a flight that always renews just when coming down, and so I shall never comprehend magpiety. If, however, magpiety doesn't exist, my nature doesn't exist either. Who would have guessed that centuries later I would invent the question of universals? I said that I write only in Polish. I have never attempted to write in English or in French. But there is one poem I wrote in English due to circumstances. I had a discussion with a Hindu writer and philosopher, Raja Rao. It was in Austin, Texas. And he tried to convert me to his Oriental wisdom and to, as a matter of fact, he's a Brahmin. But I was resistant, very resistant, and then I got angry and then came home and wrote the following poem to Raja Rao in English, a letter in the form of a poem, or a poem in the form of a letter. Raja, I wish I knew the cause of that malady. For years I couldn't accept the place I was in. I felt I should be somewhere else. A city, trees, human voices lacked the quality of presence. I would live by the hope of moving on. Somewhere else there was a city of real presence, of real trees and voices and friendship and love. Link, if you wish, my peculiar case on the border of schizophrenia to the messianic hope of my civilization. Ill at ease in the tyranny, ill at ease in the republic. In the one I longed for freedom, in the other for the end of corruption. Building in my mind a permanent polis forever deprived of aimless bustle. I learned at last to say, this is my home, here, before the glowing call of ocean sunsets, on the shore which faces the shores of your Asia, in a great republic, moderately corrupt. Raja, this didn't cure me of my guilt and shame, a shame of failing to be what I should have been. The image of myself grows gigantic on the wall, and against it, my miserable shadow. That's how I came to believe in original sin, which is nothing but the first victory of the ego. Tormented by my ego, deluded by it, I give you, as you see, a ready argument. I hear you saying that liberation is possible, and that Socratic wisdom is identical with your gurus. No, Raja. I must start from what I am. I am those monsters which visit my dreams and reveal to me my hidden essence. If I am sick, there is no proof whatsoever that man is a healthy creature. Greece had to lose. Her pure consciousness had to make our agony only more acute. We needed God loving us in our weakness and not in the glory of beatitude. No help, Raja. My part is agony, struggle, abjection, self-love and self-hate, prayer for the kingdom, and reading Pascal. I have spent many years in a place which you will recognize in the following poem. The title of the poem is A Magic Mountain. As you know, that's the title of a novel by Thomas Mann. The hero of that novel came to a sanitarium in Switzerland at the time when TB was fashionable and spent some 9 years over there in the mountains, in the Davos. So I hope that you will recognize the place from my poem here, Magic Mountain. I don't remember exactly when Budberg died. It was either 2 years ago or 3. The same with Chen, whether last year or the one before. Soon after our arrival, Budberg, gently pensive, said that in the beginning it is hard to get accustomed, for here there is no spring or summer, no winter or fall. I kept dreaming of snow and birch forests, where so little changes you hardly notice how time goes by. This is, you will see, a magic mountain. Budberg, a familiar name in my childhood. They were prominent in our region, this Russian family, descendants of German Balts. I read none of his works, too specialized. And Chen, I have heard, was an exquisite poet, which I must take on faith, for he wrote in Chinese. Sultry Octobers, cool Julys, trees blossom in February. Here the nuptial flight of hummingbirds doesn't forecast spring. Only the faithful maple sheds its leaves every year for no reason. Its ancestors simply learned in that way. I sensed Budberg was right, and I rebelled. So I won't have power, won't save the world. Fame will pass me by, no tiara, no crown. Did I then train myself the unique, to compose stanzas for gulls and sea haze, to listen to the foghorns blaring down below? Until it passed. What passed? Life. Now I am not ashamed of my defeat. One murky island with its barking seals or a parched desert is enough to make us say, yes, we see. Even asleep we partake in the becoming of the world. That's from Heraclitus. Endurance comes only from enduring. With a flick of the wrist, I fashioned an invisible rope and climbed it, and it held me. What procession, quelle délice, what caps and hooded gowns. Most respected Professor Budberg, most distinguished Professor Chen, wrong honorable Professor Milosz, who wrote poems in some unheard of tongue, who will count them anyway. And here, sunlight, so that the flames of the tall candles fade, and how many generations of hummingbirds keep them company as they walk on. Are healthy things. Of earthly civilization, what shall we say? That it was a system of colored spheres cast in smoked glass, where a luminescent liquid thread kept winding and unwinding, or that it was an array of sunburst palaces shooting up from a dome with massive gates, behind which walked a monstrosity without a face, that everyday lots were cast, and that whoever drew low was marched there as sacrifice, old men, children, young boys and young girls. Or we may say otherwise, that we lived in a golden fleece, in a rainbow net, in a cloud cocoon suspended from the branch of a galactic tree. And our net was woven from the stuff of signs, hieroglyphs for the eye and ear, amorous rings. A sound reverberated inward, sculpturing our time, the flicker, flutter, twitter of our language. For from what could we weave the boundary between within and without, light and abyss, if not from ourselves, our own warm breath and lipstick and gauze and muslin, from the heartbeat whose silence makes the world die? Or perhaps we'll say nothing of earthly civilization, for nobody really knows what it was. Well, maybe I would read to you a very short philosophical poems of 4 lines. When the moon rises and women in flowery dresses are strolling, I am struck by their eyes, eyelashes, and the whole arrangement of the world. It seems to me that from such a strong mutual attraction, the ultimate truth should issue at last. Well, I have a number of poems. I define myself as a poet, pessimistic but ecstatic. And here is a poem entitled Rivers. Of course, I prefer this poem in Polish because of its very strong rhythm, but in translating, I try to be close to that rhythm. Under various names, I have praised only you, rivers. You are milk and honey and love and death and dance. From a spring in hidden grottos, sipping from mossy rocks where a goddess pours live water from a pitcher, at clear streams in the meadow where rills murmur underground, your race and my race begin, and amazement and quick passage. Naked, I exposed my face to the sun, steering with hardly a dip of the paddle. Oak woods, fields, a pine forest skimming by, around every bend the promise of the earth. Village smoke, sleepy herds, flights of martins over sandy bluffs. I entered your water slowly, step by step, and the current in that silence took me by the knees until I surrendered, and it carried me, and I swam through the huge reflected sky of a triumphant noon. I was on your banks at the onset of midsummer night, when the full moon rolls out and lips touch in the rituals of kissing. I hear in myself, now as then, the lapping of water by the boathouse, and the whisper that calls me in for an embrace and for consolation. We go down with the bells ringing in all the sunken cities. Forgotten, we are greeted by the embassies of the dead, while your endless flowing carries us on, and neither is nor was, the moment only, eternal. Well, sometimes, this poem, of course, reflects my youth, my adolescence spent in the city of Vilna, which is now the capital of the Soviet Lithuania, which is a city on the banks of a very beautiful river. And there is a lot of rivers and lakes in that country. So this is in poem, my love for rivers is reflected. Maybe I should tell you a story of a poem. Sometimes poems have strange stories. In 1950, I was then still in the service of the Polish government. I was deeply depressed by what was going on in Poland. So I wrote a short poem just to let my steam off without any hope, of course, of publishing that poem. That was a poem of a dissident, of a man who was against the government. 30 years later, that poem was chosen by a committee building a monument for workers in Gdańsk, for workers killed in the riots against the police in 1970. And a fragment of that poem was placed, engraved in bronze, on the monument over there in Gdańsk. That was the time of solidarity. So I am going to read to you a translation done by my former student and friend Richard Lurie, there are some lines which I do not like in translation, but I have no better translation. So this is a very short classical poem. You who wronged a simple man, bursting into laughter at the crime, and kept a crowd of fools around you, mixing good and evil to blur the line, though everyone bowed down before you, saying virtue and wisdom lit your way, striking gold medals in your honor, glad to have survived another day, do not feel safe. The poet remembers. You can slay one, but another is born. The words are written down, the deed, the date, and you'd have done better with a winter dawn, a rope and a branch bowed beneath your weight. So this, of course, this poem is a kind of an incantation against evil, against the totalitarian terror. Maybe I would read you a few short poems. Proof. And yet you experienced the flames of hell. You can even say what they are like, real, ending in sharp hooks, so that they tear up flesh, piece by piece, to the bone. You walked in the street, and it was going on, the lashing and bleeding. You remember, therefore you have no doubt, there is a hell for certain. Now about the world of suffering and pain and evil. Pure beauty, benediction, you are all I gathered from a life that was bitter and confused, in which I learned about evil, my own and not my own. Wonder kept seizing me, and I recall only wonder. Risings of the sun over endless green, a universe of grasses and flowers opening to the first light, blue outline of the mountain and the Hosanna shout. I asked how many times, is this the truth of the earth? How can laments and curses be turned into hymns? What makes you need to pretend when you know better? But the lips praised on their own the feet ran, the heart beat strongly, and the tongue proclaimed its adoration. I am the author of a poem entitled Ars Poetica. Innumerable poets in the past wrote recipes how to write poetry. I am not sure of my recipe, so my title has an interrogation mark after Ars Poetica with interrogation mark. I have always aspired to a more spacious form that would be free from the claims of poetry or prose, and would let us understand each other without exposing the author or reader to sublime agonies. In the very essence of poetry, there is something indecent. A thing is brought forth which we didn't know we had in us. So we blink our eyes as if a tiger had sprung out and stood in the light, lashing his tail. That's why poetry is rightly said to be dictated by a daimonion, though it's an exaggeration to maintain that he must be an angel. It's hard to guess where that pride of poets comes from, when so often they are put to shame by the disclosure of their frailty. What reasonable man would like to be a city of demons, who behave as if they were at home, speak in many tongues, and who, not satisfied with stealing his lips or hand, work at changing his destiny for their convenience? It's true that what is morbid is highly valued today, and so you may think that I am only joking, or that I have devised just one more means of praising art with the help of irony.